Hello and welcome to UX Leadership by Design. I'm your host, Mark Baldino. I'm also a co-founder of Fuzzy Math. Fuzzy Math is the user experience design consultancy that brings consumer-grade UX to business applications, B2B, and the enterprise. Today, I had the absolute pleasure to speak with Mollie Cox, who is the Director of Product Design at Fleetio and an Adjunct Professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I'll be honest, Mollie is the type of leader that I strive to be. She's an educator by nature, but also now sort of by profession. And Mollie takes that sort of educational approach to each member of her team. Her leadership style, as she described it, I think is really simple and effective. It's grow my people. Grow my people for as long as I have them in my organization. And not everyone takes that approach to leadership. And we discuss a really sort of core important component for Mollie of what she calls radical softness, which is to harness our emotions as a strength and not as a weakness. And I think that's really, really hard to do. And anyone who knows me knows I could use some radical softness. But that's why I say Mollie's a leader I think we all should look up to and learn from. So please enjoy the conversation, and thanks as always for listening. Mollie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate your time today. Would love, as a starter, not a surprise, tell us a little bit about your journey, through the arc of your career to now kind of being a, director of product design.
Sure. I like to think that I'm one of those old school non-traditional paths before, there was majors in college and boot camps and things along those lines. Yeah. So I had an abnormal trajectory, just a little bit, but I've been in the industry about 20 years, probably 18 if we want exact numbers. But I was really started in the agency side of the world. So when I was in the agency side, obviously this is about 2005. Everybody was much more about aesthetics and things. And this is when I got coined director of interactive, right? So, helping manage and go through the developers' work alongside of the designers. But, there was always that question of making it better outside from a functionality standpoint. So I was always very interested in that. So we evolved that at the agency I was in, and then I transitioned into software. So from there, I worked at software organizations from a 4-person startup in fintech all the way to a global sports tech company with about 3,000 people worldwide. And I've done all the way from marketing tech to enterprise to, like I said, fintech. So I've kind of seen the gambit in product design. So,
and now you're adjunct professor as well. You've added that to the another feather to the cap.
I am. I have actually taught at the University of Nebraska here in Lincoln since 2013. So I am going in my 11th year as a professor. So it's actually a pretty ingrained part of my life at this point. So
besides design, what's the thread, and maybe it's within design, that connects the early career all the way through current career and being a teacher, being a professor?
One of the things for me, obviously you said earlier, I'm a director, I'm on the leadership side of the house. I've always kind of naturally stepped into that environment. I'm one of those, if you want to talk Gallup strengths, I have activator in there. And so I think as an activator, you tend to naturally step into those into the leadership side of situations. So for me, I have a very strong drive to help grow the knowledge of others. And I don't know where that comes from. I think learning, the more you can talk about something, the more you actually learn about it. If you have to create a curriculum, you have to know your information very in depth. So actually, to me, it was a really great opportunity to learn my craft more in depth by having to figure out how to teach it to other people in a very simplistic manner. So when I started, there was obviously frameworks, but I always started in design. I have actually taught at the university. I've done video, photo, portfolio class. I've done art direction, and now I primarily do product design.
Right on. And you feel like education has always been like, that's the throughput, is educating those around you. And as you said, It's one thing to understand how to do something. It's a whole nother skill set, which is, again, there's a framework of learning and mastering concepts, but one of them is actually being able to effectively teach that. But that's always been, I was going to say, where's that come from? You said, I don't really know where it comes from, but it's always been part of, and it's not just activation and leading. There's a lot of different ways to lead, but your leadership style has been through education and building up those around you.
Correct. Even from when I was little, I remember I was in first grade, I was in a jump rope club, right? And I had finally figured out how to do the double Dutch, and I was super excited. And I remember there was a couple other students who were not getting it, and I walked them through step by step how you would do the double Dutch. And there's always, when somebody gets the aha moment, right? So in software, we talk about those digital activation steps, and for a user, there's that aha moment. I think for me in life, I love seeing face-to-face IRL aha moments in people, those sparks when they get something and something clicks. So I think it's innately been in me, but I especially love seeing it with students, and I love growing designers in this field. I think there's a very big difference of what we actually do versus sometimes what is taught. So I try to do a lot of practical application in our learning.
Fantastic. I want to get back to that practical application, but I just, I want to point out that there are a lot of different ways to lead and, or mentor. I'll use that, right? Because for me, I try not to, but it's a lot. If I'm mentoring somebody, I feel like I'm answering questions. I'm giving them the answers. I'm just helping them solve this problem, which is a totally different approach than teaching somebody how to do that. And not here to judge which is better, but that's a different style, and it requires a different type of energy and a different, just sort of operating procedure, which is I'm going to try to educate, upskill, grow my design team through teaching, through practical application, versus I'm going to give them the answers. I'm going to tell them, how to navigate, how to navigate a situation. And maybe that's part of communication and part of sort of mentorship, but it's a little bit different of a style. And I'm kind of curious. It sounds like it comes naturally to you, but you could have chosen a bunch of other paths, and you've landed on this one. And then, as I said, add another feather to your cap. You've doubled down, and now you're actually a professor. What is it about that I want to cover two ways. What is it about that path that you find a little bit challenging for you personally, or maybe education in general? And what do you find really what's really rewarding from it? What re-energizes you as part of that process?
Sure. So going to the question of, what makes it challenging, or what makes it different, and what makes it a little hard, because you're right with, the difference in mentors, especially in design. And if you're mentoring within your industry, chances are they want to be in that session with you, right? They want to be there. They want to learn. They want to grow, and you're helping guide them. But yes, you're giving them answers. Like you said, they're asking a lot of questions, and you're giving a lot of answers. I think the difference in the classroom that's really challenging is they don't necessarily want to be there, right? They may have an interest in it, but they could just be trying to get credits for a degree. And this class just happened to sound interesting. So some students come in with absolutely no knowledge level of what we're trying to do. Other students have come in with some type of foundation, but maybe not hard. So there's different skill levels in there. So you have to pare back. How do I attack this and teach this from a perspective of varying education levels, right? How do I make it interesting and engaging for everybody? Yep. But ultimately, there are students who just don't, who aren't engaged, who won't be engaged. Yep. And that's a challenge. You sit up there and it's crickets. And if you do podcasts, you public speak, that engagement from your audience is super important. So even as a professor, if you're not getting that engagement from your students, you feel the heart start beating a little bit, right? Yeah. But where's the magic? You said, what's the good outcome? So those same students who come in with zero interest in product design, I have seen so many flourish over the years as product designers. I have seen people come in as account executives with an advertising track and all of a sudden transition into product design. Selfishly, It's how I find some of my best interns. So,
Fair enough. Well
so
done.
I get first pick. I get first dibs of the best of the best coming out of class. But I have hired on actually many of my students. Some of my most tenacious and extremely ambitious employees have been students coming directly out of my class. So not only do I get to see it click for them, but then I get to see how they flourish in their own career moving forward. So I think that's a super incredible aspect to being a professor.
Wonderful. You mentioned practicality and teaching practical skills. Like, can you talk more about that? Because frankly, I think it's like super underrated, and I think you alluded to, not always what you're getting from educational courses, sometimes not even from, mentorship you're getting in a professional setting. Like, what's that focus? Why is it important to you to be teaching things that fundamentals and that are actually applicable?
Yep. So I think when you're looking at some of those principles and those core things and teaching practicality, I think one of the primary tenets of design, there's so many, but is collaboration, right? And collaboration is very difficult in the classroom in the aspect that we have a mindset of what group projects are going to be. Somebody's going to put in a little bit more, somebody's going to put in a little bit less. So I really try to attack this as you are a development team, you are designers and developers. And so we do our class. I actually conduct our class in sprints. We have 2 weeks to do all of our modules. And I try to give them a cadence of how that would work. We use Miro for all of our assignments. So I try to bring in the actual tools that they would be using in the real world. And through that, I take them through workshops, but then when I take them, like, let's say we do a section on personas, right? I'll teach them that, but then I have them do their personas and they have to build their own workshop based on how they think they would aggregate the information and investigate all the different demographics and ethnographics of a persona. So to me, really, I try to teach them versus how would you pull that information out of another group of people.
Right. So it's less design theory, although maybe that's part of the background, but this is what a persona is. This is why we use them. This is how not to use them. You're almost putting them in kind of a client scenario, which is, you need to aggregate this information. You need to present it, organize it, prioritize it with a group of people, come up with some sort of deliverable, which seems like impactful if somebody's going to, translate that from a career perspective, or maybe, as you said, some people find that, this could be a really rewarding career. What have you taken out of the classroom? Like, what do you learn in the classroom that you end up applying in, I don't want to say the day job because they're probably, you have a lot going on, but kind of in the professional sense? Are there things you've learned, or techniques, or your role as a professor? How has that shifted or changed how you design, or how you lead, or how you communicate with the people around you?
Sure. That's a great question. I think the primary thing that pops into my head when you ask that question is, first and foremost, we don't value how much we actually know sometimes, right? I was actually listening to a podcast not too long ago, and the guest was saying that they ask an interview question that is basically to every candidate, that what is the last complex challenge that you faced, and explain it to me like I'm 7, right? I think that's really interesting, because what that's asking and what I'm learning is, how do you take this very complex structure, this whole process that we call product design, and simplify it and bring it down? How do you take journey mapping and make that a week, right? How do you simplify that? And then on top of that, so that's kind of the side of being able to articulate very complex situations in a much more meaningful, simplistic way. And then the other side of it is, honestly, public speaking. Like I when I get on a stage, I pretend everybody's my student, right? Because what I just said a couple moments ago is, don't underestimate what you know. When I first walked into teaching, I thought, the imposter syndrome came in. I thought I was a fraud. How am I going to teach them anything they don't already know? But especially when you're working with juniors, it's imperative to remember that they don't have the building blocks. They don't have the time in that you have. And actually, we end up describing things in too complex of a way, right? So
Yep.
paring that down is, so it's kind of twofold. It helps with communication, but again, paring down that complexity.
100%. I think I'm anyone who works with me knows I won't stop talking until I think I've talked. Yeah, I've spoken to death about it, and I have to catch myself because I think I'm using more words to communicate. But the truth is, it's like a very simple lesson in terms of, I don't know if it was seventh grade or what the age group was. Like what's the very least amount of information I can share to get my point across, to sell my idea, to introduce my idea, to talk about users. We did at Fuzzy Math a number of years ago. We did like mentorship with grade school students, and they were like on the job. So go to an architecture firm, kind of learning that, and I don't know if somebody want to go to an accountant's office, but like when you go to a design studio, it's like what can we boil down our process to in very, very simple steps for somebody who's in elementary school to be able to design an application. And you reminded me of this exercise, which is really helpful, and I think for designers in general, is like we do know a lot, and sometimes we forget that, but it's also not important to share all that we know with everyone. And sometimes the best communication methods are when we are really boiling it down, getting down to the fundamentals, and not using design jargon, not using 15 sentence when one sentence will work. And I think it's a hard skill to learn and a hard skill to remember. But I think it's really interesting that there's that heavy overlap between how you're learning as a professor or as you're teaching, and bringing that back to the people you work with and the folks you coach. And so I want to talk a little bit about what you consider, Mollie's what's your leadership style? How do you approach it? We've obviously talked about education, so I'd be shocked if that wasn't a big core component. But like, how do you define your leadership style, and what's important to you to be building and growing within the folks on your team?
Yeah. So if one of the primary things that I believe in leadership is, and I know this is one of the reasons that we've come together, is I kind of created a post of what I call radical softness, right? There's actually, this is kind of derived from a poet, and it talks about essentially the theory behind radical softness is it can be, your emotions actually can be one of your greatest assets in leadership. So with that, I think my leadership style is very, I hope others would say the same, very open, very authentic and transparent. But as you just said, I'm a huge believer in growth, because again, that's innately in me. I'm a professor. So on the growth side of the house, with the designers I work with on a daily basis, let's look at the design industry right now, right? Like, let's be honest. In my opinion, I feel like if I'm going to be with one of my designers for 5 years, I'm pretty lucky. Like that's probably the longest relationship sometimes you're going to have with your designers, right? We want new challenges. So it's sometimes not necessarily your manager or the company that you're leaving for, but it's rather new challenges and new problems to solve. So my philosophy is that in that time frame that I have you, it is my responsibility to do everything in my power to get you to that next level, that next step, or that next place, so you move on to the place you want to be for that next challenge, right? So I attack that two ways. I feel that, yes, let's talk about everything that's happening within design, how we make that better. We'll do our critiques, we'll do our reviews, we'll do our working sessions and things along those lines. But also, how can I grow you outside of the organization that we work with? I think sometimes we put these blinders on and feel like as leaders, we have to talk within the purview of the company in which we work for. but we're people, right? And we have so many other desires and so many other things. So I try to pay very, very special attention to making sure individuals grow, not just within, but outside of an organization.
Is it fair to ask you to break down more of like the radical softness? I'm super interested in this concept of harnessing one's emotions. Anyone who works at Fuzzy Math who's listening to this will know that at times my emotions get the better of me, and they cloud my judgment, they cloud my communication style, and in full transparency, sometimes a lot of the work that I do doesn't get seen or heard because my emotional response can be too strong, and then it's like it doesn't matter. It really literally doesn't matter what else I say because people are sort of, I at times, again, in full transparency, I struggle sometimes with that level of transparency and just sort of allowing things to come to me. And I pretend to be a little bit too responsive. And I'm not trying to make this a design therapy session at all, but like if not everybody comes in with like an openness approach to their communication, and sometimes their emotions in environments, are counterproductive. Does radical softness account for people who maybe aren't as soft by nature?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. And I think we have to understand that, radical softness, you still have to have a component of emotional intelligence within that, right? You still have to be able to, when I say, use your emotions as a catalyst for leadership and be able to be vulnerable and things, we also have to remember the environment in which we're in. And we have to, in that, remember how to conduct ourselves in that environment. But it's the transparency. So I'm not saying just go fly off the handle and yell at anybody and, do the things that you want to do. But what I'm saying is be very open about how you're feeling in a situation. Be very open about how, is there an impediment? Is there a blocker? And because of this, I feel X, right? I think, I think this is especially challenging sometimes for women in leadership, right? Because, sometimes emotions are used against females, and it's like the whole Barbie movie you just saw. If you've seen the new Barbie movie, there was the whole America Ferrera monologue about the contradictions of being a woman. And so I feel like the same contradiction holds true with our emotions in a workplace, right? So I think that there are, we can go into each one, but to me, I feel like there's really 4 primary components to radical softness and how you maintain composure and how you do those things. But those are, first and foremost, is to normalize somebody having emotions because we're human beings, right? It's okay if you get upset. It's okay if you get mad. I feel you. I've been there. Also, to be vulnerable, which is easier said than done. And then being authentic, which is an interesting one because I feel like that's such a phrase right now. It's such a buzzword to be authentic. Yep. But there is a way that you can do that without just saying be authentic. And then also, I think that one of the biggest components of it is empowerment, empowering your people. And that comes from being transparent and vulnerable.
Fantastic. Thank you for breaking that down further. That's really hard. I don't know. Just personally, it's hard to do, as you said, like being vulnerable, creating that space. And then, as you said, that last step of sort of being very transparent and utilizing that for empowerment for your team. And I think for a lot of people, the hustle and bustle of work or strains of work, I think for a lot of businesses, 2023 was not a great year. So there's a lot of like extra stressors within organizations, between organizations. It's a hard time. I feel like I've been saying this since the pandemic. It's a hard time to be a human. And it's a hard time to be a designer. I want to shift part of the conversation to say that I think this sounds amazing. And I think it's amazing that you carve out this time for your team to help grow them and mentor them and teach them skills, knowing that you have them for a short period of time and they're going to go someplace else. If I were going to evaluate that from a business metrics and KPIs perspective, or I would ask something shameful of like, what's the ROI? Like, it's hard to calculate that stuff. So how are you carving out room and time for that growth with your design team when there are other pressures, downward pressure from management, production level pressure? Like, did you make a business case for this, or did you ignore it and you just get our work done and we do it on the side? Like, what's the trick there to embrace something like radical softness and truly sort of nurturing your design team while also, like I said, kind of getting the job done?
So that's a really great question, because I actually have a lot of tactics for this, right?
Great.
So yes, and radical softness, the transparency, the authenticity, creating all of those in your design culture is actually what helps with being open about goals and how to move forward. So with the design team that I'm working with, and I do this typically with any design team that I'm on, I think it's really important to do goal setting together. I sit with every designer at the beginning of each quarter. I sit down with them. I make in Fig Jam. They're very pretty because we're designers. I make I make goal boards for everybody. And on these goal boards, I do what I call essentially the 3 E's. Okay. So when I'm looking at it, I think of there's 3 different buckets that we're trying to learn. We're trying to learn experience, we're trying to learn exposure, and we're trying to learn education, right? So as a designer, if you're trying to build goals around that framework, what I ask each one of them is I have them brainstorm all these different things that they want to learn. I do a skills matrix with everybody. We look at their gaps, we see where they are. But how do we tie it to what we do today? How do we tie it to the business? So let's say they brainstorm a bunch of goals they want to set for exposure, which is essentially our influence area. What I do is then we take a look at what their upcoming work is. And I say, take this moment to be selfish. How can you apply the goals you want to do to what you're doing today, to your actual work? How can we build that in to your work, right? So for instance, let me give you a quick example. Just last week, I was working with a designer, and she's in the process of building out a whole UX playbook for our team, right? And she's like, well, I'm doing this big thing and I have all these goals and I really want to learn AI, but I just don't know that I have the time and the bandwidth. And I said, well, wait a second, you're building the design playbook right now. Make a section on plays for AI. So that way the whole team has AI, you're learning AI, but it's very lucrative and necessary to the work that we do today. So she's blending her own personal goal with the needs of the organization.
Which draws that connection for very helpful for the designer, right? To be thinking, because that translation of, I think it's a natural question of how is my contribution on a day in and day out basis as individual contributor contributing to the bigger picture of the business. And then they can see in this example in front of them, like, okay, here's some actual practical steps I can take and it's going to benefit me. It's going to benefit the team and, in the long run benefit the kind of organization as a whole. So it sounds like it's kind of part of your process of goal setting and mentorship and growing designers is at a very basic level, combining what they have from a goal perspective to the goals of the organization. Absolutely. And that creates that case. And you've never had any, I don't want to say you'd have pushback, because I think hopefully business leaders sort of understand that, but I think you're taking a long-term view of humans, and I think sometimes businesses take a shorter-term view of humans from an output and a production perspective. But I'm assuming as long as everyone's getting their job done, work's getting done, we're producing as a design team along those metrics, then it's not sort of an issue to take this tact, which is much more like a hands-on individual growth. I'm not trying to create a problem that would exist, but I've worked at enough companies that I know sometimes this approach might feel like it's not totally in alignment with the business. Even if you're helping individuals align with the business, does the business kind of seeing the output of the value there?
I think that's a great point. And I think we also have to remember like how the market has evolved and how the needs of employees have evolved. We've got these new mindsets raising up, and expectations are different, and work-life balance, all of these things. And I think as an organization, there is an expectation now that I will have leveling, I will have a growth path, I will have these things, you will grow me, right? And so to some extent, whether it's outside of what our business goals are, it's also, if you look at the people side, it's part of talent, it's part of retention. Look, I know, like I said, I feel pretty lucky because we know on average people are going to leave, right? But the longer tenure we have at this point, especially in a startup software company, if we have somebody stay 8 years, you're doing something right, right? And but again, I think it's really in alignment with expectations. So to go back to what you said, I've never really run into a problem with it. I've been in organizations where they put a 2-hour time slot every Friday on your calendar for personal development, right? They want everybody to do personal development in that 2 hour. Well, what do I do? I don't know. Am I supposed to get on like Coursera? Like, what am I supposed to do? And so this is a very tangible way to say, these are the areas you want to grow. Let's make it applicable to here. They don't have to bucket time on their calendar. They're just applying it to what they do every day.
Yeah, right. Because if they don't know what to do, and this is not any discredit, it's like they're probably going to pull their laptop screen down and just like breathe for a while, right? Like, it's like stuff's hard and it's challenging, and in the remote world sort of adds to all of that. I think you're doing some amazing work helping develop designers, but also helping them understand how their development contributes to the bigger picture. And then there's, as you said, there's the other side of the coin there, which is the expectation has really changed for what employment means. And I think you talk about leveling, but I think there's a lot of concrete things that are important to employees in general, but certainly designers, because that's my team, that are more important now in the remote world and maybe generationally. And a lot of the softer stuff that was of value to employees 10 years ago, 15 years ago, like it's just not as valuable. And I think it does go down to that work-life balance, which I frankly think is a healthy thing. The ancillary benefits of working at a company that are really cultural, but also require, extra hours in the office. And, that sort of trade-off, I think isn't as, I think it's actually in a healthier space, which is let's create some better divisions between the work we do, and let's focus on the value of just, kind of that 9 to 5 and give employees what it is they seek. And I think you're right. If there's a case to be made, it is about retention and talent management and ensuring that people have space to grow within their role, or as you said, maybe at the next organization down the line. So, yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you for your time. I encourage anybody to listen to this, and we'll put a link to Mollie's LinkedIn to connect with you or follow you on LinkedIn. Is there any other things you're working on? People can find you. Anything you wanted to say? Hey, reach out to me here outside of LinkedIn.
Yeah. So also thanks for the super kind words on the content that I'm putting out. You know how all of that is. It's all experimentation. I've been on ADP list doing mentorship. Now I know there's a lot of different sides to ADP list. Some people love it, some people don't. But ultimately my goal of being there is really giving back to our community right now. And so you can certainly find me there. I've met phenomenal people, just really stellar thinkers, all the way from, junior designers just wanting portfolio reviews. My favorite has been working with senior designers on problems who are solo designers at their organization. And I'm giving them goals, giving them a plan, and they're coming back the next week and we're reviewing it together. So it's been a lot of fun. So if you're interested in that, come find me on ADP.
Fantastic. I hope we drive more people to you. I don't know how you have the time in the day to do all that you're doing, but I just want to say, thank you for giving back to the community, which is, it's given me a lot, and obviously has you as well, but it's much appreciated. And I love the fact that mentorship doesn't have to be, I'm just out of a boot camp. I mean, that's really an important component. I'm in my first role, but solo practitioners at companies who are struggling with like really hard challenges and don't have the resources. That's just absolutely invaluable to the community. So, well, thank you for your time today. Thanks for, helping educate the listeners here on your sort of leadership style and on radical softness. It is really much appreciated. We'll include links to your LinkedIn and your ADP list when we post the episode. So thank you again,
Awesome.
Mollie.
I really appreciate it, Mark. Thank you for having me here.